Begin today with a live look at the Senate floor, where Senate clerks are reading every single word of the Senate's 940-page version of the president's so-called big, beautiful bill, a key demand from Democrats. In a dramatic late-night vote, the bill passed a key procedural hurdle to begin debate after hours of delay. The vote was 51-49, with all Democrats voting no. Two Republicans, Kentucky's Rand Paul and North Carolina's Thom Tillis, also voted no on opening debate. Vice President J.D. Vance traveled to the Capitol Saturday night in case his vote was needed to break a tie. But Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin ended up switching his vote after initially opposing the motion to proceed. President Trump, of course, immediately attacked Senator Tillis after his no vote, posting on social media that Tillis was, quote, making a big mistake for America and the wonderful people of North Carolina, end quote. Trump also threatened to back one of numerous potential primary challengers against Tillis and to meet with potential challengers over the coming weeks. Now, despite last night's vote, it's still unclear if Republicans will ultimately have the votes for final passage of the bill. They can lose no more than 3 Republican senators, and if the measure passes, the Senate, it still has to go back to the House for approval. Joining us now, Brendan Buck, former press secretary to former House Speakers John Boehner and Paul Ryan, Molly Jong-Fast, special correspondent at Vanity Fair and a New York Times bestselling author, and Politico congressional reporter Nicholas Wu. Welcome, everyone, to the weekend. Okay, Nicholas, bring us up to speed and explain to viewers why the procedural vote that happened is just one part of a 2-step process that the Senate is going through right now.
Well, this was really just the very first hurdle for them. This was the procedural vote and the motion to, the so-called motion to proceed, the bill itself. But what this really was in many ways was a proxy for the amount of support this bill itself has among Senate Republicans. And last night, we already saw what some of the pain points are going to be for them as they move through this process. You had key moderates like Lisa Murkowski really drag their feet on where she was going to land on this. You had Senate Republicans who were mad about public land provisions. And then you had fiscal conservatives who were meeting with Majority Leader John Thune up until the very last minute, turning what it would have been a relatively short exercise into a 4-hour-long affair. And so this brings us to where we are now, where the bill is being read in entirety, and then there will be a series of unlimited amendments that could drag final passage of this into Monday.
Mm. Brendan, one of the things that is really interesting to all of us, I think, is kind of the fact that politically it continues to seem like this isn't a huge winner for Republicans. You have Senator Tillis, who voted no yesterday of North Carolina, one of the most vulnerable Republican senators, saying, I cannot support this bill in its current form. It would result in tens of billions of dollars in lost funding for North Carolina, including our hospitals and rural communities. This will force the state to make painful decisions like eliminating Medicaid coverage for hundreds of thousands in the expansion population. You have Louisiana hospitals, according to Politico, warning Mike Johnson of devastation from the mega bill. It just seems over and over again they are getting proof positive that maybe this bill in its current form is not good for them politically, and yet they're still moving forward. Obviously, this is a procedural vote, but it shows kind of a preview of things to come.
Yeah, I think it's the result of a really bad process, and a bad process is going to lead to a bad policy outcome. The reality is they have to move forward, because if they don't, Donald Trump has absolutely nothing to show for himself as a legislative agenda. Yeah, this is unpopular. You've reached this sort of tipping point where you never want to get, where of course Democrats are saying it's bad, but we've also had weeks or months now where Republicans have been saying how bad it is. And so it does, poll very poorly. I don't know that it is actually that big of a political liability. In some ways, it's because Democrats have not paid that much attention to this. This has been story, 3 or 4 for most Democrats, and Republicans have been able to fly under the radar. They're about to pass this huge bill. that I think most people are not paying attention to because everybody's been chasing around the immigration stuff or the DOJ stuff. There's a lot of stuff that, Tom Tillis, who's got a very close re-election race in North Carolina, understands there's a lot of liabilities here. And so he's going to risk a primary to vote no against it. I think that tells you the politics of it. But for most of these people, as long as they can deliver Donald Trump's agenda, that's all that really matters. And that's what they're doing.
Molly, what do you think? Do you think that Democrats have done enough to capitalize on the bill's shortcomings and unpopularity? Or do you think, as Brendan was saying, they've let this, kind of be one of many back burner issues?
Well, so here's the thing about this bill, right? Which, by the way, that polling that was just up on the screen, it's hard to find something that this many Americans agree is bad, right? I mean, that was amazing numbers. Look, there are things to not like in this bill from people like Rand Paul, and things to not like in this bill from Tom Tillis, right?
I do want to point out that Rand Paul went golfing yesterday with Trump,
right?
And yet still didn't vote for it. So God bless him. God bless him.
This bill is incredible, right? It grows the deficit while cutting SNAP and cutting health care. So here's what and closing rural hospitals, right? And there's like a panic with these red state Republican senators that they're going to close their local hospitals and nursing homes, and grandma's going to move back in, which will actually happen if they do these cuts. But what these cuts are for is the most bonkers part, right? They're for a missile defense system, right? More money for weapons and for that kind of thing. Then weird tax provisions, some of which work, some of which don't. There's, the no tax on tips, right? It's like, it's pure MAGA, right? It's mostly campaign promises. And like a missile defense system, the stuff with the defense, a lot of stuff for the border wall, and they're cutting food stamps.
Right.
So, and they're growing the deficit. So who is this for?
Right. And,
Except Trump.
Well, sure. And in the end, that might be why this whole thing passes, despite the political liabilities. But, one of the people who voted to proceed on the on debate of this bill is somebody who's been out there ringing the alarm about rural hospitals, and that's Senator Josh Hawley. Listen to what he had to say. This was yesterday afternoon. I don't agree with him on a lot of stuff, but on this one, preach, brother.
I think that this has been an unhappy episode here in Congress, this effort to cut Medicaid. And I think, frankly, my party needs to do some soul searching. If you want to be a working class party, you've got to deliver for working class people. You cannot take away health care from working people. And unless this is changed going forward, that is what will happen in coming years. So I'm going to do everything I can to stop that.
And so, Nicholas Wu, the question here is, will Senator Hawley stand by his convictions as expressed in that soundbite that we just played and vote no on the bill? He voted yes on the motion to proceed, which I completely get from a process standpoint, and you're a Republican. You want to go back to your constituents and say, look, I voted to let debate happen on the bill. I didn't like it, and so I voted against it in order to protect you. But will Senator Hawley be able to withstand the gale force winds coming from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue?
Hawley is so far looking like he might end up voting for final passage of this bill. But the question is whether or not it changes anything more before final passage, because one of the potential compromises that allowed the motion to proceed to go forward last night was what appears to be a commitment made to fiscal conservatives in the Senate to put up an amendment to further change Medicaid, to undo some of the federal cost sharing that was expanded with Obamacare. And so if that is allowed to pass, they could have some real math problems within their own conference moving forward as they try to tee up this legislation.
Brendan, this is obviously step one for the Senate. The Senate has to vote for final passage, but then it has to go back to your old stomping grounds in the House, where folks have talked over and over again once they read the bill after they voted for it, realizing they didn't like certain things in the bill. Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of them, who dislikes the fact that you can't make any changes to AI, prevent states from making changes to AI law for 10 years. How do you think this ends up playing in the House? Because then that's step 62 of this long process.
Yeah, well, look, the whole rigmarole that the Senate's been going through the last few days with conservatives griping and moderates saying it's too much is exactly what happened in the House the first time when the House passed it. And I imagine when it comes back to the House, there'll be the same thing again. Look, there is no way to make this good for everybody, even in the Republican Party. If you go softer on Medicaid, you're going to have fiscal conservatives upset. If you go deeper on Medicaid, there's no good answer here that makes life easy for the leaders. So the real solution, and this sounds sort of silly, the real solution is just force a vote. Just make the bet that they won't vote against it, and that's worked every single time for Mike Johnson. And I think that's going to work again here. Thom Tillis being threatened to have a primary run against him is probably exactly what Mike Johnson needed, because none of those House members who care a lot more about Donald Trump than Senate members do will see that. Mike Johnson's going to put it on the floor, and they may say, I hate this, I don't like this, this or this, but they're going to have really very little option other than to vote for it. So look, the House likes to be crazy. It wouldn't surprise me if something goes off the rails for a few days, but that July 4th deadline and Donald Trump breathing down their neck, I'm confident that, this doesn't sound sophisticated, but you're just going to put it on the floor and it's going to pass. I don't really know how, but it's going to.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, everyone and everybody is completely unhappy with this, but it's going to continue in a couple of days and everyone will still continue moaning,
But also, it
complaining.
raises the debt ceiling.
$4 trillion?
Yeah. No, it
Most
raises
recent?
the debt ceiling and grows the deficit.
And everybody knows this.
Right. I mean, there's just nothing to like in this bill. And it's amazing that you can have a bill that both does these two things at once.
And has such widespread opposition. And yet, to Brendan's point, somehow, some way, all of us here at this table in New York and in various screens around the country, we just know that how this is going to end.
Well, and the longer that it's in the public sphere, it just marinates how swampy it is. And you're just so conscious of all that tack-ons and how the fossil fuel industry is just faring so well.
And to add, and as Molly was saying, $4 trillion to the national debt over the next 10 years, according to the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. That's from yesterday. Nick Wu, thank you so much for coming on The Weekend.